Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere, when you know you absolutely do? What would you do if someone tried to kick you out of your own home? Well, that's exactly what happened to me last summer, and those fake HOA enforcers had no idea who they were messing with. I'm Mark Jensen, and I've lived in Oakwood Heights for just under a year. It's a nice neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors, at least most of them. I bought my house after working hard for years as a county prosecutor, but I keep a low profile. I don't talk much about my job with the neighbors. I'm not flashy, I drive a regular car, and I tend to dress casually on weekends. Some might say I look younger than my 38 years, especially when I'm in shorts and a t-shirt working in my yard. Let me tell you a bit more about my neighborhood and how I ended up here. Oakwood Heights is one of those places where the streets have names like Maple Lane and Cherry Blossom Drive. My house sits on Willow Street, right where it curves around a small park. It's not the biggest house on the block, but it's mine, and I worked really hard to get it. For 10 whole years, I saved my money. I ate cheap lunches at my desk instead of going out to fancy restaurants with my co-worker friends. I drove my old car even when it made funny noises and everyone teased me about it. Every extra dollar went straight into my house fund. When I finally had enough for a down payment, I felt like I had won a gold medal at the Olympics. I still remember the day I got the keys. I stood in the empty living room and just smiled until my cheeks hurt. My house is painted a light blue color, with white trim around the windows and doors. There's a small front porch where I put a rocking chair and some flower pots. In the backyard, I built a wooden deck where I like to sit and read books on sunny days. I planted a vegetable garden along the back fence, nothing fancy, just some tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. It's not perfect, but it's mine, and I love coming home to it every day. The people who live in Oakwood Heights are mostly nice. There's Mrs. Wilson next door who bakes cookies for everyone during the holidays. Mr. and Mrs. Lopez across the street always wave when I drive by, and they have 2 kids who sell lemonade in the summer. Down the block is Mr. Peterson who walks his golden retriever named Buddy twice a day, rain or shine. And I can't forget about the Garcia family at the corner house. They throw the best 4th of July party every year and invite the whole neighborhood. But like I said, not everyone is super friendly. There's a group of people who take the HOA rules very seriously. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. They're like the rule makers for our neighborhood. They decide things like what color you can paint your house, how tall your grass can be, and what kinds of decorations you can put in your yard. Most HOAs are fine, but some can be really strict. In our neighborhood, the HOA is run by a board of 5 people who get elected by all the homeowners. The president is Mrs. Thompson, a retired teacher who's actually pretty reasonable. But some of the other board members seem to enjoy finding problems with people's houses and sending out warning letters. I got one once because my trash can stayed at the curb until the evening instead of being brought back right after the garbage truck came. It wasn't a big deal, but it gives you an idea of how picky some people can be. When I first moved in, I read all the HOA rules very carefully. It was a big packet of papers with lots of boring stuff about fence heights and mailbox styles. But as a prosecutor, I'm used to reading boring legal documents, so I made sure I understood everything. I didn't want to break any rules by accident. The section about plants and gardens was especially long. They had lists of plants that were allowed and plants that weren't allowed. I made sure to only buy approved plants for my yard. At work, I handle all kinds of cases, but I specialize in fraud cases. That means I deal with people who trick others out of their money or property. I've seen all sorts of scams, fake charity collectors, people who pretend to be from the bank or the government, and yes, even people who make up fake rules to scare homeowners. After seeing so many people get tricked, I'm pretty good at spotting when something doesn't seem right. But at home, I'm just regular Mark. I wear old t-shirts with cartoon characters or sports team logos. I have a collection of baseball caps that I wear when I'm working in the yard. My favorite weekend outfit is a pair of cargo shorts with lots of pockets and a faded blue t-shirt from college. Nothing about me screams I'm an important lawyer. And that's exactly how I like it. My house became my big project. Every weekend, I worked on something to make it nicer. I painted all the rooms myself. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet by watching videos online. I put up shelves for my books and hung pictures on the walls. Outside, I planted flowers and bushes and spent hours making sure my lawn looked nice. Not because the HOA required it, but because I was proud of my home and wanted it to look good. In my job as a prosecutor, I spend my days in suits and ties, talking in formal language and dealing with serious situations. It can be very stressful. Sometimes I have to put bad people in jail. Other times I have to tell victims of crimes that we couldn't catch the person who hurt them. It's not an easy job, but it's important. When I come home, I like to leave all that behind. I don't want to be Prosecutor Jensen at home. I just want to be Mark, the guy who likes to grill burgers on the weekend and watch baseball games. That's why most of my neighbors had no idea what I did for a living. When people asked, I just said I work for the county government or I'm in the legal department. Most people didn't ask more questions after that because it sounded boring. A few neighbors knew I was a lawyer of some kind, but I never went into details. Mrs. Rodriguez next door knew because her son was interested in law school, and I gave him some advice. But for the most part, people just saw me as the new guy who kept to himself but was friendly enough when you talked to him. I kind of liked being anonymous in my own neighborhood. No one treated me differently because of my job. No one asked me for free legal advice at neighborhood parties. And no one was nervous around me thinking I was judging them or looking for things they did wrong. Last summer was my first full summer in the house. I had moved in during the fall, so I missed gardening season. I was really excited to work on my yard and make it look nice. I spent hours at the garden store looking at different plants and flowers. I made a whole plan for where everything would go. I bought tools and gloves and special soil. I was ready to create my perfect yard. July in our town is usually hot and sunny. The kind of weather where you need to wear a hat and put on lots of sunscreen or you'll get burned. That particular Saturday morning started out like any other summer day. I got up early because it's better to work outside before it gets too hot. I had a quick breakfast, just cereal and orange juice, and then changed into my work clothes. That day I wore an old green t-shirt with a small hole near the bottom, khaki shorts that had paint stains from when I painted my bathroom, and my most comfortable work boots. I put on my favorite baseball cap, the one from my hometown team that was faded from years in the sun. I looked like any regular guy ready to do yard work, not like someone who stands up in court and puts criminals in jail. My big project that day was planting new bushes along the front walkway. The previous owners had left that area empty, just plain dirt with a few weeds. I had bought 6 azalea bushes that would have pretty pink flowers in the spring. I checked the HOA plant list 3 times to make sure azaleas were allowed. They were on the approved list, so I knew I was following the rules. Planting bushes is hard work. First, you have to dig big holes. The garden store person told me the holes should be twice as wide as the root ball of the plant. That means if the roots and dirt that come with the plant are 10 inches wide, you need to dig a hole that's 20 inches wide. Not deep, but wide. This gives the roots room to spread out. So there I was, digging holes in the hot sun. I had marked spots for all 6 bushes, making sure they were evenly spaced. I dug the first 3 holes and was working on the 4th one. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and I had dirt on my hands, arms, knees, and probably my face too. I was completely focused on my task, trying to make each hole the perfect size for the bushes. I had my gardening tools spread out on the walkway, my shovel, a small hand trowel for detailed work, gardening gloves, which I wasn't wearing because they made my hands too hot, a watering can, and a bag of special soil meant to help new plants grow better. My garden hose was stretched across the lawn, ready to give the new bushes a good drink once they were all planted. The radio was playing my favorite songs from the 80s and 90s, sitting on my porch steps where it wouldn't get dirty. I was humming along, thinking about how nice the bushes would look once they were all planted and grew a bit. I was imagining next spring when they would be covered in bright pink flowers. My neighbors were out doing their weekend activities too. The family 2 doors down was washing their car in their driveway. Kids were riding bikes in the street. Someone was mowing their lawn a few houses away. It was a normal, peaceful Saturday in Oakwood Heights. I had no idea that my relaxing gardening day was about to turn into something very different. That's when I heard someone clear their throat loudly behind me, ahem. The kind of sound people make when they want your attention but don't want to say excuse me. I was kneeling on the ground, digging with my small trowel, with my back to the street. I wasn't expecting anyone, so the sound surprised me. I turned around, still on my knees, one hand holding the trowel, the other covered in dirt. And that's when I saw them, two people I'd never seen before, standing on my walkway, looking down at me with expressions that clearly showed they thought they were more important than me. Little did they know who they were actually dealing with. Little did they know they had picked exactly the wrong person to try their tricks on. Little did they know that their fake badges and official-looking clipboards wouldn't fool me for a second. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you exactly what happened, step by step, on that hot July day when two strangers tried to kick me out of my own house. The man was tall and thin, wearing pressed khaki pants and a navy blue polo shirt with some kind of logo on the pocket. He had perfectly combed hair and wore sunglasses that looked expensive. He held a clipboard and had a pen tucked behind his ear, like someone who checks things off lists for a living. The woman was shorter but looked just as serious. She wore a matching navy blue polo shirt with the same logo, tan pants, and had her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She had her arms crossed over her chest and was looking at my half-planted bushes like they were something disgusting. They stood side by side, blocking the path to my front door, with matching frowns on their faces. They looked official and important, at least, that's what they wanted me to think. I didn't recognize them from any HOA meetings I'd attended, but I figured maybe they were new committee members or something. I wasn't worried at first. Maybe they were just doing a regular check of the neighborhood. Maybe they wanted to welcome me to the community, even though I'd been there almost a year. Maybe they were selling something, though they didn't look like typical salespeople. I had no idea that these two people were about to try to convince me that I didn't belong in my own home. I had no idea they were complete fakes with no real authority. I had no idea they had picked me as an easy target because I looked young and was dressed in dirty work clothes. But I was about to find out. And they were about to learn a valuable lesson: never judge a book by its cover. Especially when that book happens to be a county prosecutor who specializes in fraud cases. The day had started so normally, so peacefully. Just a guy working in his yard, trying to make his house look nice. But sometimes the most ordinary days can take the most unexpected turns. And this ordinary Saturday was about to become a day that I, and definitely these two fake HOA enforcers, would never forget. As I looked up at them from my kneeling position in the dirt, I had no idea that the next hour would involve threats, lies, and ultimately, justice. I had no idea that my quiet day of gardening would end with police cars and real justice being served. I had no idea that my professional life and my personal life were about to collide in a way I never expected. But that's exactly what happened. And I'm going to tell you the whole story, from beginning to end, so you can see how these scammers operate, and how they picked exactly the wrong person to try to scam that day. So there I was, covered in dirt, looking up at two strangers who clearly thought they had some kind of authority over me and my property. I didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a very strange encounter, one that would end very differently than these fake HOA enforcers expected. In my years as a prosecutor, I've learned that scammers come in all shapes and sizes. Some are obvious, they have shifty eyes or speak too quickly. But the dangerous ones, the ones who really fool people, look completely normal. They look trustworthy. They look official. Just like these two people standing on my walkway. When you work with the law every day like I do, you learn to spot small details that don't add up. You develop a sense for when something isn't quite right. Like when someone claims to have authority they don't actually have. Or when they can't answer basic questions about the rules they claim to be enforcing. These skills have helped me put a lot of bad people behind bars over the years. And they were about to help me in my own front yard. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me go back to that moment, kneeling in the dirt, looking up at two strangers who were about to try to convince me that I was breaking rules that didn't exist, in a house that they claimed wasn't mine. Let me tell you exactly how it all unfolded, step by step. The tall man looked down at me through his expensive sunglasses. He had the kind of fake smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind used by people who think they're better than you. The woman beside him kept her arms crossed, her face showing nothing but disapproval as she looked at my half-finished gardening project. I realized they were waiting for me to stand up, as if I needed to show them respect by getting to my feet. I took my time, brushing some dirt off my knees, placing my garden trowel carefully on the ground. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I also wasn't going to jump to attention just because two strangers showed up in my yard. When I finally stood up, I noticed they both took a small step back, as if they didn't want to get too close to the dirty gardener. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. Real HOA board members in our neighborhood are friendly. They might enforce rules, but they're still your neighbors. They don't act like they're afraid to get dirt on their shoes. But at that moment, I was just confused. Why were these people here? What did they want? And why were they looking at me like I was doing something wrong? I was about to find out. And they were about to learn that they had made a very big mistake. Let me tell you, nothing beats the feeling of being in your own yard, working on your own home, when suddenly strangers show up and start acting like you're the one who doesn't belong there. It's weird and frustrating and makes no sense at all. But that's exactly what was about to happen to me. The sun was high in the sky now, making the day even hotter. Sweat dripped down my back as I stood facing these two unwelcome visitors. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Someone's lawnmower hummed a few houses away. It was such a normal Saturday in every way, except for these two people standing on my walkway, about to turn my peaceful day upside down. I had no idea what they wanted, but I was about to find out. And they had no idea who I was, but they were about to find out too. And believe me, they weren't going to like what they discovered. Not one bit. The tall man cleared his throat again and looked down at his clipboard. "Are you the gardener?" he asked, as if it was hard for him to even say the word. Like being a gardener was something shameful. I almost laughed. Did I look like a professional gardener? With my mismatched clothes and simple tools? But I kept a straight face and said, "No, I live here. Can I help you with something?" The man and woman exchanged a quick look. I could almost see what they were thinking. This young-looking, dirty guy couldn't possibly own this house. He must be lying. And in that moment, I realized they had already decided I didn't belong here, before they even spoke to me. "We're with the Homeowners Association," the woman said, pointing to the logo on her shirt. "Special Enforcement Division. We've had reports of unauthorized landscaping in this area." I looked at the logo on their shirts more closely. It showed a house with the letters HOA underneath. It looked official enough at a quick glance, but something about it seemed off. The design was too simple, not like the professional logo on the real HOA newsletters we got every month. "Special Enforcement Division," I repeated. I wasn't aware our HOA had a special division. I've been to several meetings and never heard about that. Another quick look between them. The man stepped forward. "We don't attend regular meetings. We report directly to the board. Now, about these plants." He gestured to my azalea bushes, 3 already in the ground, 3 still in their pots waiting to be planted. "These are not on the approved vegetation list for front yards in Oakwood Heights." Now I knew something was definitely wrong. I had checked the list multiple times. Azaleas were specifically mentioned as approved plants. In fact, several of my neighbors had azaleas in their yards. "Actually," I said calmly, "azaleas are on the approved list. I checked before buying them." The woman shook her head. "The list was updated last month. These are no longer approved." "Really?" I said. "That's interesting because I received the HOA newsletter last week, and there was no mention of changes to the approved plants list. When exactly was this change made?" The man flipped through papers on his clipboard, frowning. "It was, recently. Very recently. But that's not the only issue here." He looked up from his clipboard and stared hard at me. "Our main concern is that you appear to be making significant changes to the property without proper authorization from the homeowner." And there it was. They weren't just questioning my plans. They were questioning whether I belonged there at all. Whether I had the right to be in my own yard, at my own house. They had decided, based on nothing but my appearance, that I couldn't possibly be the owner of this home. I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice calm. Years of courtroom experience had taught me to never show when you're upset. "I am the homeowner," I said simply. The woman laughed, actually laughed, and gave the man a look that clearly said, "Can you believe this guy?" "Look," she said, talking slowly as if I might not understand basic English, "we know the Jensen family owns this house. If you're doing work for them, you need proper documentation and approval for any changes." They knew my last name. That part was right. But they were still assuming I was some kind of worker, not the owner. Not Mark Jensen himself, standing right in front of them. "I am Mark Jensen," I said. "I bought this house last fall. I have owned it for almost a year now." The man lowered his sunglasses and looked at me over the top of them. "Sir, we have the homeowner's information on file. Mark Jensen is a county attorney. He wouldn't be out here digging in the dirt on a Saturday." And that's when I understood exactly what was happening. They had done just enough research to know the owner's name and job, but not enough to know what I looked like. They saw a young-looking guy in dirty clothes doing yard work and assumed I couldn't possibly be a successful professional who owned a nice house in a good neighborhood. They had profiled me based on my appearance and decided I didn't belong. And now they were trying to use that assumption to intimidate me. The question was, why? What did they really want? "Why don't we call the real homeowner right now?" the woman suggested with a smirk. "I'm sure Mr. Jensen would be very interested to know what's happening at his property." I almost laughed out loud. "That would be difficult," I said, "since Mr. Jensen is standing right here talking to you. You expect us to believe that?" The man said, his voice getting louder. "A county prosecutor would know better than to violate HOA regulations." "I'm not violating any regulations," I said calmly. "As I already explained, azaleas are on the approved list. I specifically checked before purchasing them." The woman stepped closer, trying to look intimidating. "The real Mark Jensen would have proper identification to prove who he is. Do you have any ID showing you're the homeowner?" Now we were getting to it. They wanted me to go inside and get identification. But why? Were they planning to follow me in? Case my house for a later break-in? Or was this a different kind of scam? "My ID is inside," I said, watching their reactions carefully. "But before I go get it, I'd like to see your HOA identification. I don't recognize either of you from any meetings I've attended." They exchanged another glance. The man puffed up his chest. "We told you, we're with the Special Enforcement Division. We don't attend regular meetings." "Then you must have some kind of official identification," I pressed. "All HOA board members and officials have proper ID cards. I'd like to see yours." The man pointed to the logo on his shirt again. "This is our identification. Now, if you can't prove you're authorized to be here, we'll have no choice but to report this as trespassing." This was getting ridiculous. I was standing in my own front yard, being told I was trespassing. But I wanted to see how far they would take this. What was their end game? "Let me understand," I said. "You're claiming to be from an HOA division I've never heard of, enforcing a rule change that was never communicated to homeowners, and you have no identification beyond matching shirts. And based on this, you want me to stop working on my own property?" The woman's face hardened. "We don't have to explain ourselves to the gardener. Either get proper authorization from the homeowner, or pack up your things and leave." "And if I don't?" I asked. The man took out his phone. "Then we call the police and report you for trespassing and property damage." I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had come out onto her porch across the street. She was watching us with a concerned expression. She knew who I was. She knew I owned this house. And from the look on her face, she could tell something wasn't right about this situation. The fake HOA enforcers followed my gaze and saw Mrs. Rodriguez watching. For the first time, they looked slightly uncertain. "Fine," I said. "Let's clear this up once and for all. I'll go inside and get my ID to prove I'm Mark Jensen, the homeowner." The woman nodded, looking satisfied. "We'll wait right here. And hurry up, we have other properties to inspect today." As I walked toward my front door, I heard the man say quietly to the woman, "This should be good. $10 says he runs out the back door." I smiled to myself. They had no idea who they were dealing with. No idea at all. Inside my cool, air-conditioned house, I took a moment to think. What were these people really after? They clearly weren't from the real HOA. Were they scoping out houses to rob? Were they trying to get violation fees from people who didn't know better? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever they were up to, they had picked the wrong house and the wrong person to try their scam on. I looked out my front window and saw them still standing there, looking impatient. The man was checking his watch. The woman was typing something on her phone. I had a choice to make. I could simply show them my driver's license and watch them make excuses and leave. Or I could take this opportunity to potentially catch people who might be scamming other homeowners in the area. As a prosecutor, I knew all too well how vulnerable people can be when someone shows up claiming to have authority. I decided to go with option 2. I went to my office and picked up my county prosecutor badge and ID. Then I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation briefly. The dispatcher said they would send an officer right away, but it might take 10 to 15 minutes. Next, I texted Mrs. Rodriguez, "Those people aren't real HOA. They're trying to scam me. I've called police. Can you keep watching?" She texted back immediately, "OMG. Yes, I'll watch. Be careful." I put my prosecutor ID in my pocket, took a deep breath, and headed back outside to confront the fake HOA enforcers. Time to see what they were really up to. When I stepped back outside, the fake HOA enforcers were exactly where I'd left them. The man was tapping his foot impatiently. The woman looked up from her phone with an expression that said finally. "Well?" The man said, holding out his hand expectantly. "Let's see this ID that proves you're Mark Jensen." I walked down the steps slowly, taking my time. "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about this whole situation. Something just doesn't add up." The woman frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, "I've lived here almost a year. I've been to every HOA meeting. I've read all the bylaws and regulations. And I've never heard of a special enforcement division. So before I show you my ID, I'd like to see some proof that you actually represent the Oakwood Heights HOA." The man's face reddened. "We already told you, our shirts are our identification. Anyone can make shirts with logos," I pointed out. "That's not official identification." "Look," the woman said, her voice getting louder, "we don't have time for this. Either show us proof that you're authorized to be here, or we'll report you for trespassing." I crossed my arms, mirroring her earlier pose. "To whom will you report me? The real HOA? The police? Because I welcome either of those options." The man stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You're being uncooperative. We have the authority to issue fines for HOA violations, and trust me, you don't want to deal with those costs." "Ah, so that was it? They were trying to collect fake fines. A common scam, especially in neighborhoods with lots of new homeowners who might not know all the real rules yet. How much are these fines?" I asked, sounding worried. I wanted to see how far they would take this. The woman jumped in quickly. "For unauthorized landscaping, it's $250. For obstructing an HOA investigation, that's another $500. And if we have to escalate this to trespassing, that's $1,000. "Wow," I said, pretending to be shocked. $1,750 in fines. That's a lot of money. It can all go away if you just cooperate," the man said, his voice suddenly friendlier. "Remove these unauthorized plants, pay a reduced fine of $500 for the violation, and we can forget the whole thing." I noticed Mrs. Rodriguez was still watching from her porch. She had her phone in her hand, probably ready to call for help if needed. I gave her a small nod to let her know I was okay. "And how would I pay this fine?" I asked the fake enforcers. "Do I write a check to the HOA?" The woman shook her head. "For immediate resolution, we accept cash or money order only. Checks take too long to process." Of course they wanted cash. "No paper trail that way." "I don't have that much cash on me," I said, sounding disappointed. "There's an ATM at the gas station down the street," the man suggested helpfully. "We can drive you there and bring you right back." Getting me in their car was probably part of their plan too. Get me away from my house, maybe even rob me at the ATM. These people were running a pretty comprehensive scam. "Before we do that," I said, "I'd like to call the HOA president to confirm all this." "Mrs. Thompson, right? Do you have her number?" They exchanged another nervous glance. "That won't be necessary," the woman said quickly. "We have full authority to handle this situation." Still, I insisted, I'd feel better hearing it from her. "In fact, why don't we call her right now?" I pulled out my phone. The man reached out as if to grab my phone, then caught himself. "The board president doesn't handle day-to-day enforcement issues. That's why the special division exists." "Interesting," I said. Because I had coffee with Mrs. Thompson just last week, and she never mentioned a special division. In fact, when I told her about my landscaping plans, she said azaleas were a great choice. The woman's fake smile faltered. Mrs. Thompson doesn't always know about recent rule changes. But I thought the special division reported directly to the board. I asked innocently. Wouldn't the board president know about rule changes? They were getting flustered. Their story had too many holes, and they knew it. But instead of backing down, they decided to escalate. The man took a step closer. Enough of this. You have 30 minutes to remove these plants and vacate the property, or we're calling the police. I smiled. Please, go ahead and call them. In fact, I already did. They should be here any minute. Their faces showed real alarm now. The woman grabbed the man's arm. We have other properties to inspect. This is a waste of our time. No, please stay, I said. I'm sure the police would love to meet representatives from the HOA Special Enforcement Division. Especially since I've never heard of it, and I happen to know all the actual HOA board members. The man pointed his finger at me. You're making a big mistake. The fines will triple if you keep obstructing us. I saw a police car turning onto our street. Perfect timing. Speaking of mistakes, I said, did you know that impersonating officials and attempting to collect fraudulent fines can be charged as criminal fraud? And trespassing on private property and threatening the homeowner can add additional charges. The blood drained from their faces as they saw the police car approaching. They turned to leave, walking quickly toward a white sedan parked at the curb. I wouldn't leave if I were you, I called after them. That would look like fleeing the scene. The police car pulled up in front of my house. Officer Rivera, who I recognized from several cases I'd prosecuted, stepped out. He saw me and looked confused. Mr. Jensen? You called about HOA scammers. The fake enforcers froze. They looked from Officer Rivera to me and back again. The realization was dawning on their faces. They had tried to run their scam on a county prosecutor who worked with the local police department. Yes, officer, I said, walking toward him. These two individuals claimed to be from a special enforcement division of our HOA. They tried to tell me I was violating rules that don't exist and demanded cash payments for fake fines. When I questioned their authority, they threatened to have me removed from my own property. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my county prosecutor ID and badge, showing it to the fake enforcers. By the way, I am Mark Jensen, homeowner and county prosecutor. And you two are in a world of trouble. The looks on their faces were priceless. Complete shock. They had picked a house at random, assuming the young-looking guy in dirty clothes couldn't possibly be the homeowner. They had targeted me because I looked like an easy mark. And now they were facing a police officer and a prosecutor who specialized in fraud cases. Officer Rivera approached them. I'm going to need to see some identification, please. The man tried one last bluff. This is all a misunderstanding. We really are with the HOA. There's been some confusion. Then you should have proper identification to prove it, Officer Rivera said firmly. And we can clear this up by calling the HOA president. I believe Mrs. Thompson still holds that position. The woman's shoulders slumped. They knew they were caught. Any real HOA representative would have legitimate ID and would know the HOA president. They had neither. Mrs. Rodriguez had come across the street and was now standing near my driveway. Those two were at the Wilson house yesterday, she told Officer Rivera. Mrs. Wilson said they told her she needed to pay a fine for her bird feeder being too close to the property line. So they had been running this scam throughout the neighborhood. Targeting people with made-up violations and collecting fake fines. How many people had already paid them out of fear or confusion? As Officer Rivera began taking their information, I noticed the logo on their shirts more closely. It wasn't just any house with HOA under it. It was designed to look very similar to our actual HOA logo, but with slight differences. They had put some effort into the scam, which meant it probably wasn't their first time. While Officer Rivera handled the fake enforcers, I called Mrs. Thompson, our real HOA president. She was shocked to hear about the scam and said she would send an email alert to all homeowners immediately. She also promised to come right over to help identify whether these people had any connection to our neighborhood at all. By this time, several neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, watching the drama unfold. The fake enforcers.